Hello, I am Rudy. And this is Graham. And Mike.
This is a short video montage of our project. There are brief snippets of each of our main dialogues, along with some footage from our concluding dialogue.
We hope you will find this insightful and entertaining.
I remember the first contract school I worked at in Surrey. It was right in the heart of the Indo-Canadian community. The students of the school were about 90% Indian descent, with the rest being white. The few white students seemed to play up their whiteness, if that makes any sense. They would wear plaid jackets and ripped jeans. They would bring their electric guitars to school and play Nirvana songs at lunch. They all seemed like a caricature of a depressed emo suburban white kid.
Why do you think these white kids had to play up their whiteness, as you said? Do you think that it was more for themselves, for fear of losing their identities, or was it more for society, as a reminder that they were still around and not to be forgotten?
That's a good question, Mike.
Thanks.
I think for my white Surrey kids, it was for themselves, as a way to express their identities. So much of being a teenager is discovering who you are, and when you are a minority, I think it is natural to begin to identify more with what makes you different from the rest. It wasn't like these kids were delving into white supremacy or anything like that. They just seemed to latch onto what it meant to be white. But even just saying those words, what it means to be white, does it mean anything? That feels weird to ask something like that.
For my students, living in one of the lower income areas of the city, I almost sense a mixed identity of East Side pride, combined with East Side shame. On one hand, these kids are proud of their neighborhood, almost as if living in the East Side shows that they are keeping it real, more down to earth, more in touch with the real world, which makes them a cooler person. On the other hand, when things go wrong, or when issues of poverty arise, I immediately hear from them, "Oh well, what do you expect? It is East Van." This duality is in constant conflict at Britannia.
Interesting. When we are young, our emotions and identities are raw and undeveloped. It is tough to know where you fit in, and in the end you are adopting, borrowing, and testing out if there are identities that aren't necessarily your own. I also listened to a lot of hip-hop and gangster rap. There was a moment when I was in grade 11 where I began to question what I was listening to. It finally dawned on me that I was not a poor disenfranchised black kid from the ghetto, and neither were those other Asian kids. When I finally left high school, I was more comfortable with saying, I am Graham, a half-Chinese kid from an upper-middle-class neighborhood in Canada. Did you guys have a similar experience with your identities in high school?
There once was a man named Bill who ate an atomic pill. His stomach corroded, his navel exploded, and they found his nuts in Brazil. I thought it was a clever limerick, but I was oblivious to its inappropriate nature. All I remember was Mr. R. looking at me, shaking his head slowly in disapproval. I think that particular moment decided my fate with him for the rest of the year.
Did he say anything else to you or yell at you?
No, he shook his head slowly, with a sad look in his eyes. Perhaps that was the reason that I ended up with so many needs improvements on my report card in grade 4. Nevertheless, the 1 year I had a male teacher certainly left a sour note in my mouth. Now, it could have just been circumstance that the 1 year I decided to do inappropriate things was the 1 year I happened to have a male teacher. Do you guys think that all male children need male role models in the classroom? I, for one, being a mama's boy, didn't think I benefited at all. I think that I preferred the more nurturing, female teachers.
I don't think all male students need male teachers, but they can certainly benefit from having one. What I found interesting from analyzing my own story and report cards was that there was no direct data that showed any academic improvement. I had always regarded my grade 5 teacher as the teacher who snapped me out of being an average student and sent me on my way to academic glory. Maybe it is because we put too much emphasis on grades. Maybe Mr. B's impact was more as a motivator and role model, and not as a master teacher capable of turning me into a Nobel Prize winner. Maybe these expectations were too unattainable. The bottom line is, he was able to make learning fun and build a connection with me. Could a female teacher have done this? Absolutely.
It's strange, because I do feel that there is a need for both genders in education, and yet I'm reluctant to say that there's also some kind of determinism here, that a male teacher can do certain things that a female teacher cannot effectively do, and vice versa. And yet I think that when schools become too dominated by one gender, which, I guess, can be an issue in elementary schools, I feel that something is lost. So maybe I am saying that there is a deterministic aspect to gender roles in teaching.
Teaching, like other occupations, is not immune to people bending the truth to get a job position. What differs with teaching is that there is no easing you into a job. If you landed a job and it is outside of your comfort zone, well, too bad. You better figure it out quickly. There is little in the way of mentoring that occurs while on the job. You just have to make your way through the uncertainty and helplessness. It is a matter of survival.
I totally agree with you on the survival mode thing. My first couple of years were pretty hard. I felt like I was thrown headfirst into a den of hungry lions. As a beginning teacher, you are pretty much left to fend for yourself, and the amount of stress can be insurmountable. I think that is why there is such a high turnover rate of teachers in their first 5 years of teaching. I wrote positive notes of encouragement to myself and stuck them around my house. On my fridge was a note that said, "You can do it." And I had another one that said, "At least you have a job."
I really think that the profession of teaching is unique in that new employees are expected to perform essentially the identical task as veteran workers. What other jobs are like that? Normally there is a learning curve, but in teaching it seems to be more of a cliff as opposed to a curve. Most jobs have many incremental steps which people make their way through. But the structure of the teaching profession doesn't seem to allow any sort of progression. You said it, Mike, those first 5 years can be brutal. The expectations are huge and people make mistakes. But it seems that teachers aren't allowed to make mistakes. Or, at least, that's how new teachers feel, I think. I think one of the key reasons we've been able to work together is that we share a similar sense of humor. That was something that was recurring in all of our conversations, and the precluding stories. Even when topics were somewhat dark or perhaps shameful, we would make a joke about it. That has been key to this project, and to working together. Being able to laugh at ourselves and each other has kept things moving along smoothly. Personally, I think having a sense of humor is key in any stressful job, teaching being one such job, of course.
I agree. Humor has been a recurring theme throughout our dialogues. If you are able to make fun of your successes and failures, it shows that you are fairly comfortable with your identity. Humor, like good food and music, is something that is universal and capable of bringing people together. I don't think any of us would have been able to share our stories without injecting humor.
I remember Munir and Karen's advice to have fun and enjoy ourselves while doing this capstone. That mantra has been the underlying theme for me when approaching this project. Also, if you look into one of the reasons people tell stories, a big one is for entertainment value. Personally, I am much better at entertaining people through humor than through tears. This emerged through one of our initial discussions, with you, Rudy, commenting that my stories were funny.
When I think of myself as a teacher, I always think of taking my job seriously, but not myself. And I will admit, or perhaps I shouldn't, that when Mike said his racist joke about how do you know when you've been robbed by a Chinese man, I had to suppress a laugh. It was a terrible joke, but I hadn't heard it before, and wanted to laugh out loud. I restrained myself to avoid being offensive myself. Although I can tell that you two are not offended.
Not easily. I have developed a pretty thick skin.
I like that joke too, but I am allowed to, as I am half Asian. You should be ashamed of yourself, Rudy. I wish I knew some good Dutch jokes about plugging dikes and wooden shoes. Oh, how I love the double standards that exist in racial humor.
And I don't know how many Dutch jokes there are about being cheap. Or just the comment, going Dutch. But that has never offended me. I, again, just find it funny. I always make fun of how incredibly frugal my mother is. Again, having a sense of humor, in a way, makes us a little more immune to these stupid little jokes and comments. And it plays into being a teacher. We have to have a thick skin.
Can you explain to me how the phrase Dutch oven is associated with farting under the covers?
Actually, I can. It's because the Dutch are supposedly so cheap that they don't want to waste anything, including the heat of a good hot fart on a cold day.
Ha ha, that was funny. Okay, let's focus back in. Now, what were we talking about?